Thanks for coming this morning. Welcome to Design Well for Modular Construction. Sorry, let me advance. There we go. I'm Ryan White, Design Director for DAHLIN. Unfortunately, Dennis Steigerwald got sick, and he's not going to be able to make it today. Dennis is the president of the Housing Innovation Alliance. So we'll do our best to cover for him. I mean, if I swing this way, maybe I'm speaking from my slides. If I'm swinging this way, we'll try to, so you guys can maybe do the same. We'll try to cover as best we can, so please bear with us. Charlie, Anthony, I'll let you two introduce yourselves.
All right, yeah, thank you. Good morning, Charly, Ligety. I am the Director of Research and Development at a nonprofit called Housing on Merit based in Los Angeles. We're a national nonprofit partnering with 15 different for-profit developers around the country, and our work kind of touches on a lot of ground-up construction for affordable housing, some of which is using modular, and we've also done a bunch of research in the modular prefab factory-built space, which I touch on later today.
Wonderful. My name is Anthony Gude, and I'm a real estate developer in Los Angeles, building steel mid-rise multifamily infill.
All right. So what we're going to cover today is factory modular built. The productivity opportunities, defining what modular is, where it's being used, who is this being designed for, what's being designed. We're going to talk about performance aspect, wellness, home as part of community. We're going to wrap it up with some execution, project examples, and some recommendations moving forward. So starting with the productivity opportunity, we all know that there's a need for housing. As we've seen that the demand is highly outpacing the availability of homes. So we've been building homes the same way for the last 100 years, and we're estimating that by 2030 there's going to be 15.5 million new dwelling units needed, and we're 1.7 million shortfall since the Great Recession. One of the problems is the availability of who can build homes. We're seeing that there's about 546,000 people that support the building that we're shorted of who can build, and the big part of that is the building envelope, the drywallers, the brick layers, framers, and things like that. System building is something that we see as a way that can help accommodate this. When you start to look at what the man hours to build a home is compared to, say, your traditionally stick frame construction, off-site constructions can do some reduction in the man hours that are required. You can get a 20–40% reduction in overall labor hours required. You can also get a 50% reduction in skilled craft labor and hours required. You're also providing a more safe environment for them in an enclosed space. You're getting rid of weather delays, things like that when it comes to factory modular versus a traditional stick built on site. However, it still is incredibly low being adopted. Over 77% of homes are still being built stick frame on site. As I mentioned, for the last over 100 years, that's the way it's been done. And it is something new. It is something different. So the way to adopt this is what we're hearing from builders, that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. This is something that's perceived benefit is not outweighing the way the homes are being built right now. And they're also saying they're too busy to do something new. And that's the fact. It is something new, but it is something that we're seeing. We're going to get into, I think, the way that's perceived of what the value of why we should do factory off-built versus on-site construction, more than just the time frame, the cost. There's other benefits that we're going to get into in this presentation. So defining what modular is.
Sure. So here is a portion of the brick-by-brick presentation by McKinsey. Got released some time ago. And they broke out each of the volumetric modular iterations or possibilities that are available in the factory-built environment. So we see a lot of corporate spin-offs that are doing bathroom pods and integrate them with a fully volumetric style project delivery method. Also other full-scale on podiums or just completely submitted buildings, and then the individual volumetric mods certified on an as-is basis. Panels are also an option, as well as other prefabricated components. And again, you can find this on the McKinsey report as sort of the availability in the market and percent completion as the trade-off for a developer that might want to deploy these methods. So again, in this slide, they break down the different structural versus non-structural and temporary modular solutions, so make sure we don't get them confused. For example, for my projects, mid-rise infill, we're either a fully fit-out MEP panel or a volumetric module that's 80 to 90% complete. In the market, there's also relocatable buildings, not to be confused with the class leasing options or other types of relocatable buildings. And there's also the non-structural, single-story, sometimes permanent elements that are also available in the market. So these are all the different options, especially when you're doing due diligence on a factory. You want to know not just the asset class they operate in, but the product they actually deliver, product or products, based on the project need.
Yeah, and I think that's the perception of modular is a lot of us think it was our grandma's double-wide trailer. It really is more than that. And if you really look at the history of modular, modular really isn't something new. If you look at the American Institute of Architects and what they define as factory modular or modular built construction, it's essentially something being built somewhere else, delivered to a site and assembled there. This goes back to the Roman Empire. The Romans used to build forts that were prefabricated elements that they carried with them when they went to conquer areas. In the 1600s, that was when it was first perceived that the first modular built home was actually built in England and shipped across to Massachusetts to be built. And in the 1800s, to help with the gold rush in California, there was over 500 modular built homes built in New York and shipped across the country to be built there. 1908, where we've all heard of the Sears and Roebuck Modern Home Catalog, where it was you had your lot, you ordered your home, it got delivered and got built. Getting a little more forward thinking, even in 1967 at the Montreal Expo, Habitat 67 was a modular project that was 148 residential units. It was over 300 modules that were put together and delivered on site. So this isn't something that's new, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the aspects of what modular can do, and maybe a future discussion is what is next for modular. So with that is, where is it being used?
For the previous slide, it was touching on the benefits of state approval. Again, a lot of times it's referred to as the build time is more efficient in the factory. I think there's a separate and very important benefit to highlight in key states where state review has been successful. And the trick, so to speak, is that you have modular or any combination of components, 3 or more, will go through state review, which includes, some folks may not know that it includes also fully fit out panels. And so you can submit that through the state and have a separate plan checker. Those firms that serve the state are much more consolidated. There's only, I think, 5 incredibly active firms. I think maybe there's 10 or 15 registered, at least in California state. So it's a much more intimate group of plan checkers, whereas your local municipality has more or less might bring it in-house or might appoint any firm they'd like, and they can insert themselves in the process if they'd like. My experience with plan check is that we're directly with the plan checker, and that's a large benefit. So in getting your compliance done, minimizing risks, meaning eliminating the game of telephone between ownership or the design team and the state plan reviewer, I think is a large benefit. And of course, that turns around into a much shorter plan check. We've also found that at the firms we have worked with at the state level, their pipeline tends to be a bit shorter because they're quite large firms and there's only so many projects moving through the system. So that'd be a benefit of the state. And then this is a color-coded map on where state plan check is available, third-party review versus state plan review and third-party review. There's a distinction between the plan checker working on behalf of the state and the inspection firm inspecting the mods. They can be one and the same, but the availability is different in each state. So it's the Northeast corridor, Texas, California come as some of the more prevalent models, but it's available throughout the 50 states.
I think this is one of Dennis's slides. Let's see if there's something to say with that one. All right.
Yep.
So now that we kind of understand where this is being built, we've touched on a little bit what modular is. We also want to understand of who we're designing for. Our company sponsors something called the America Home Study. This was actually a brainchild of Terry Slavik-Suki, TST Inc. I don't know if a few of you in the audience probably know her. She had this idea when COVID hit of there was a lot of media talking about how people are dealing with restaurant closures, grocery stores, and more of that social aspect of that, but no one was talking about how people are living in their homes through that. We launched the first survey, also partnered with Belinda Swart of Strategic Solutions. We launched the first survey in April of 2020. We naively launched the second survey of October that year, thinking we'd be post-pandemic at that point, but obviously we all know we were right in the middle of the pandemic. But we've now had a third survey that was done in October of 2022 that we have data that shows, and we've done a nationwide poll that talks to respondents at a variety of ages. We've got a balance of genders, household incomes, things like that to really understand what's important for people in home, what they value in home. So we have now during pandemic, post-pandemic, and a lot of the findings that we found is wellness is the biggest thing that's really motivating people. It's a key purchasing motivator for them. And you start to think about what that means in efficiency and design and attainability in home. And then also, there are things that did carry over that we found from the survey of how people live in their home, of work from home, school from home. So flexibility in design is very important. But we also found that they're willing to pay for smaller home and also smaller yard space if community's done well. And we'll get into that a little bit later, some of the community aspects that align with that. So now that we kind of had the data, how do you put that data to the people? So if you pair that with, and Belinda's really good at that with Strategic Solutions, you use the Kantar mind-based demographics. You hear a lot of people talk about that this is targeting millennials, this is targeting Gen X or boomers, but it really can be subcategories under that because it's not all the same. If you think about millennials, for example, the variety of ages, the variety of life stages that they're in can get very specifics. And it's interesting to see as you dive into this too, that there's a lot of information and crossover between different demographics as well. So when it comes to what's acceptable, what they will choose in home, it's very specific. So we did a home in Pittsburgh with Dennis and his team called the Picket Fence, which is an off-site modular built home. It's actually on-site and completed now. It was about a year ago that we started the concepting for it, and it's now complete and finished. But with that demographic and what we found, the highest demographic that was likely to buy, and in this case rent in this area, is the Trailblazer, which is one of the mind-based millennial demographics. The Trailblazer is about 26 to 34 years of age. They're young professionals, they're married, they either have a young child or they're about to start a family, but what's really interesting about them is there's a high percentage of them that want to rent. So how do you create a home that is attainable with a good rent so they can start to save money for when they are ready to buy a home? And I'll get a little bit more into the picket fence later as well. So understanding now that who is we're designing for, now it's understanding is what they're willing to choose in home, what values they have specifically to them. And wellness is one of the key it is the key motivator for all demographics of what we found through the survey, whereas 17% of the respondents said that they feel less satisfied with their physical well-being, 11% said they feel less satisfied with their financial well-being, and 8% are less satisfied with their emotional well-being. So that's why we were saying now wellness is the new why. This is the main motivator, what they're gonna choose in home. What they're willing to choose, number one motivator is choosing sustainable and technology. They're willing to pay for that. That actually, the wellness aspect of that outweighs the cost. Of course, there's a tolerance to that, of what they can pay for, but the wellness aspect, if you provide something that is more to their lifestyle, they're willing to pay for that. And that's one of the things we feel Factory Modular can do, because you start to get into other aspects of wellness. Because a better, healthier me is the first thing that you think about. It's the number 2 ranked for the consumer respondents that's most important to them. But when we talk about wellness, the first thing that you talk to builders, a lot of times they say is, well, we're putting good air quality, we're putting air purification, water filtration. That really aligns with your physical wellness. But wellness is so much more than that. You're talking about your emotional, your financial, your spiritual. Homes can be designed that way, and also efficiency can help maintain that financial wellness aspect. And in the respondents, the insight we got was that 86% of respondents said that financial wellness is very important to them, yet 54% feel that they are not satisfied with their financial wellness. It's a 32% gap in where they're feeling. So how can we build homes that are more attainable and efficient for what their needs are? Climate change is another big part of that, is the biggest worry among all respondents, or actually the number 3 ranked, just behind inflation and jobs and economy. So when you really think about what they're willing to pay for when it comes to reducing climate, carbon output, things like that, when we developed the picket fence, one of the reasons we went with Factory Modular is the reason that you can get a reduction in carbon output, reduction in waste. On that project, we had a target of 70% reduced carbon footprint when we did the construction. We're, as I mentioned, the home's now built. We're tracking it still about 50%, so we didn't quite meet our goal, but we're still 50% reduction in carbon output is tremendous, and we're showing that people are willing to pay for that if that's what's offered in home. So this starts to get into things like that with what the factory can do, reducing that. There's also the amount of waste that's provided through factory built versus on-site construction. I think we've seen pictures of dumpsters full of waste on on-site construction versus the picket fence home. The waste that was done with that home essentially filled a 5-gallon bucket. You're talking sawdust and little small end cuts of wood. So there's a tremendous advantage of what factory modular can do when it comes to environmental aspects and what people are willing to choose a home because of that. So, as I mentioned, building materials are responsible for approximately 11% of all global greenhouse gases. So that is a tremendous reason why that added value, why we should think of doing things a different way versus our traditional way of building homes. So, Anthony, you talked a little bit too about there's the state legislation, and as I mentioned, this is something new. We will have to adapt on the ways that these get approved, the ways that these get built. I was at a conference in Denver, Dennis's conference, the Housing Innovation Alliance, a couple weeks ago. One of the panelists said that there is over 300 zoning regulations across the nation. So to bring all that together and what you talked about state legislation, I think is just an important aspect of that. But one of the benefits too, when you think about what you can do in a factory, as I mentioned, it's a controlled environment. There's no weather delays. So it is easier to innovate too. You can try new things because you're in a controlled situation. That's actually a picture of the picket fence in the bottom right there. But one of the innovative ideas that we worked with Ibicus was the HVAC system. And this was the RIA duct system. What's interesting about this system is it actually reduces the tonnage needed for any size of home. It's easy to install. The ducts are a lot smaller. And as I mentioned, homes are getting smaller. People are willing to choose smaller home. One of the things that's really interesting about this is the size of these ducts, that you're not needing these ducts can fit through 2x4 stud walls when they're going from floor to floor. So things like the corners of walk-in closets where we're typically putting our duct chases, you can get rid of those things. So as homes get smaller, that storage becomes even more valuable. So this is one of those solutions that can help add to things like that. And then some of the other insight too is, as I mentioned, that trailblazer demographic, they're highly in renting, but they're going to buy at some point. And 48% said that they would choose, what renters would be willing to make a trade-off to buy a home. 48% said they'd be willing to take an off-site factory-built home if that meant they could buy a home. So that's really about home, but home is also part of community. When you think about downsizing home, John Burns is showing that 40% of homes are getting smaller since 2022. So homes are definitely getting smaller when you talk about land costs, getting more density. But it's not about necessarily what's in the home too. Our respondents also showed what's important to them, of what they're willing to choose in home if community offers this. Notice the one thing you're not seeing on this is the large community center. Buyers don't want that. It costs money for builders to build that, but they would more willing to have open trails, walkability, walk to a coffee shop type mentality. So if they're willing to choose a smaller yard, a smaller home, if you design a community that is designed thoughtfully to align with what the needs and what they're willing to pay for.
Wonderful. So a little bit about, that was an amazing set of slides, by the way.
Thank you.
What this illustrates, I suppose, is your conventional comparison between modular and site-built construction. The overlaps, as we know, we're building foundation up in the factory, and the site is being developed in tandem. And what is less obvious in these illustrations is the permitting and the regulatory advantage. But that, coupled with some of the points that were made earlier, in terms of density, zoning law changes, you have opportunities that you otherwise wouldn't have in housing. So from an that's okay. From an investment perspective, what we think of as developers is that we're combining that capital benefit, the gain in schedule, expedited materials procurement, having a single counterparty in the development process as an owner, together with design, then being able to reinvest that capital into a focus on livability, provide more open space, whatever the trade-off might be, that there's a cost, but that we've preserved it in another aspect of the project delivery. And those two being the bottom pillars, the illustration here is that we bring the best home at the most attainable price point, whether we're talking about multifamily infill, which is usually 1 or 2 basis points from penciling in the city of LA, or more of a sprawl suburban solution. Great. So on a broader scale as well, what we look at is that when we're able to build more units, provide the factory more certainty of execution and pipeline, it's a revolving door, so to speak. We lower our costs, we enhance returns, more projects pencil, we have more volume, therefore we have more cost compression. So for us, we've purchased 3 sites, we're building 400 units, and we're a startup developer. If we were looking at a larger scale, more well-capitalized group, they could probably 10x that relatively easily. And as long as you spread your risk across a number of suppliers, the trade-off in modular from a business perspective is really not that significant. And you can go ahead and lower your exposure to the suppliers. And this is the last slide for me. I just have, I listed a few members of our team, the projects we've worked on in the past, and that's an illustration of an 80-unit project we're doing now in the city of Los Angeles. Primarily, these are our investor group. Has very much emphasized the need for waste reduction, carbon footprint efficacy. They push recycled steel. That's why we're building in steel. And it is a volumetric modular project. So it's an example of what works in the city of Los Angeles for folks in what some call the missing middle, but folks making between $50,000 and $150,000 a year. It provides a solution that actually pencils in LA for the first time in a long time. Volumetric modular makes that possible, together with the recent zoning legislation changes and a directive from the mayor.
Are you using all the same manufacturers at those projects?
Two different fabricators across 3 projects, open book, and competitive bid. There you go.
Yeah, it's actually a couple slides of the picket fence actually being installed. One of the things, and if Dennis was here, he would say, don't choose the shortest day of the year to install a factory modular project. That's what we did on this one. Timing just when we developed it, that's what happened. So it was actually installed on site in 2 days. As you can see from the home, we tried to do as much as possible in the factory as far as exterior materials. So when these modules did get delivered to the site, it was really essentially concealing the seams of where the modules stack on top of each other. And you can see with this size module, there's some lessons learned in this process of the size of module. And it becomes just because you can doesn't mean you should. So there's a couple things we learned on what the site would allow. There was some efficiencies we learned in this process of what the factory is capable of the factory production, that just by reducing this depth of this module by 1 foot, the factory could build all 3 modules at one time, versus if we were that 1 foot longer, they could only, in the length of the run that they build the factory, they could only build 2 of them at a time. So there's some efficiencies we learned on that, but understanding the site is a very important part of it too. They were able to get it in here. Dennis mentioned that it was probably at one point about the piece of paper could probably fit between that power pole and the module, but they got it to work.
On that view of the foundation, like, so yeah, just what are you doing for the foundation on setting that? So it's not set like just on a
Correct.
slab.
That is an on-site part of it. The foundation
So
walls
like
are built on site. Yeah.
To run the utilities.
Yeah, and in some cases in homes in Pittsburgh, we didn't have a basement in this home. It was a crawl space, but they will do some on-site built construction for basements and things like that, and then have the modules delivered and put on top of that. Guessing this is one of, I think this might have been Dennis's slide. Sorry about that.
On the picket fence project, what was the total cost, and how big was that home?
So the picket fence consisted of actually 2 units. That was one of the things that we designed into the efficiency of it was with that size of the envelope and to build the efficiency of modular stacking, it didn't make sense to fill the full volume of that space. So we ended up creating 2 units in that. There's a first floor 660 square foot ADU, and then above that is a 2,007 square foot, essentially a pole part townhome unit. So what that did is it kept efficiency in home while still maintaining some nice eclectic look from the street, or a nice look from the street, but building an efficiency. Cost of construction, actually, Dennis probably has the answer to that one. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so these are just some examples that we had, Dennis had put in about some of the built projects that are being done. And then, Charlie, you can take us home with recommendations.
Yeah, so just to kind of provide some background on our work in this space. So we're a nonprofit that partners with for-profit developers all around the country. About a third of the projects that we do, we have 53 projects that we're partners on. About a third are ground-up construction, and I'd say, it's probably 2 of the 10 or 12 projects we have in the pipeline that are ground up that are going modular. So, I guess our experience coming from this is one, we're a co-developer, we're a partner with for-profit developers. The second, we lead a national research platform. It's online at housinginnovation.co/factory, which is a database of about 100 factories around the world. So, factories in Poland and factories in China, factories all over the US, sort of a sortable, filterable database that shows you various case studies of what various projects, various factories are producing, and you can filter it based on whether it's a tiny home, a backyard home, a commercial office project, or a multifamily project. So we've sort of led this outreach to a lot of factories just to try to figure out the first step of kind of educating the masses of figuring out which factories build what where. And then the third piece of that, from that research that we've done from this platform and talking to a lot of factories, is we led the design in actually using my own backyard in Los Angeles as a kind of case study, is what does it take to actually kind of deploy a tiny home that's built to backyard home standards. So we ended up taking this all the way through local permitting and state permitting to get ready to issue permits on my backyard for, it's a high cube shipping container that is built to Title 24 IRC building standard, but is also movable. It's built on the high cube shipping container chassis, so a forklift could lift it up and off onto a onto a flatbed truck. And the idea is kind of breaking down this barrier of tiny homes, modular homes, tiny homes, movable homes, rapid shelter is sort of seen as a temporary basis structure, whereas modular and sort of this picket fence project is looked at as a more permanent housing structure. And we kind of wanted to blend the two because the advantages of off-site is the fact that it's built off-site. It's mobile because it came to the site, but also could be moved later on. So sort of having temporary permanent real estate was sort of a theme that we were playing with here. This particular house, it's literally just a 8 by 20 high cube shipping container, has a bathroom, a small kitchenette, an area for a pull-out bed, and we got quotes from 3 different factories, kind of ranging from $70,000 to $100,000 for the full build-out of this unit. And then the construction costs on site was sort of interesting because a lot of cities are, even though LA is doing a lot of modular housing, it really comes down to the various plan checker that you get and how educated the staff is at the city in reviewing modular housing, how their delegated authority works on permits and plan check, interacting with that third-party inspector that Anthony was talking about. And so you had a lot of redundancy in review where we got a third party, Radco in this case, a third party to review the plans, sign off on the whole structure, make sure everything was kind of built to state factory built code. But then you had the city who also reviewed the site, how it sat on the site, how it was plugged into utilities. And of course, it's like we're trying to build the most affordable, tiny, movable home possible. And the city continues to be like, okay, you have to build like, this $20,000 drainage system and pump system. And like, they're trying to make the sewer hookups very expensive going straight off the street. So it was like a constant battle of like, well, let's think about what the minimum viable product to actually get a house deployed in someone's backyard is. And so we, the way that we ended up connecting the utilities was through this kind of just one-off approval basis of running electric and the water connections above ground underneath a deck, just so you didn't have to do any trenching, and connecting the utilities to the house drainage line versus connecting to the sewer system. So, and we're also using a macerating toilet that's found on RVs to pump the sewage out. So I mean, you can get like a macerator toilet for $1,200 that can go, sort of pump the toilet output from 15 feet vertical and 150 feet across. So sort of using some of that RV mobile home technology, but plugging it into the ADU. The city didn't like any of these innovative approaches to like, oh, what? Like you're building a brand new unit of housing for $75,000 hard cost and maybe $20,000 site cost, so under $100,000 a unit. And so there's still a lot of challenges with kind of even just following the rules, where the inspectors and the various people that have touch points on the review and approval of something will always try to veer back to the most conservative traditional method, which kind of drives up the cost. So if the city had it their way, you'd have a $75,000 home, and then you'd have another $75,000 worth of site improvements, which just kind of defeats the purpose of trying to do a off-site construction in the first place. I'll just talk about, so from our this national research platform that we run, some of the common, reviewing case studies, some of the common challenges are broken up into, I would say, the 3 different phases of delivery, both from the launch, like the sort of initial inception of coming up with a modular project, whether it's a multifamily project or a smaller project like the picket fence, the implementation, just like actually executing and delivering a unit on site, and then some sort of the long-term challenges. So the launch, so again, kind of back to that pilot tiny home, it's really hard to, the number of people that I had to like basically have, just educate on just an individual basis at the city and with the reviewers. There's just it's a big uphill battle. You need 27 different stakeholders to sign off on something. And even though 1 or 2 people is thinking innovatively and understands the challenges there's a lot of people that just are denial by delay of just like not really providing an answer and not wanting to stick their neck out on what exactly the interpretation of code is. So I think that first part of the launch is just like more education like this, of just like people understanding what factories are available out there, what the different providers are, who's what the delegated authority is. Another challenge is we see a lot of developers that we partner with kind of thinking about modular, but they're continuing to sort of design the project as a site-built project. You really have to start from the very beginning of starting a multifamily project with modular in mind, and kind of build the module around the site and the systems and the challenges there. So it's not something you can kind of veer into halfway through a design project. It's really only successful if you're doing it from the beginning. And then the finance, there's obviously lots of challenges with getting funders to banks providing early advances on a loan, on a project that's built off-site, has its own challenges. So there's not a lot of integrated, scalable solutions that are kind of customized for modular, and that kind of goes back to there's just there's not a simple delivery method. So I mean, you have the implementation challenges, obviously, with the local permits and review of just how the delegated authorities work on who's signing off on what. The integrated site work. A lot of jurisdictions are still requiring redundant site work of redundant structural. You're basically building another structure to plug the module system in. So you're sort of doing two layers of structural strengthening on a site for just purposes of people veering to the most conservative approach. And then the factory production schedules. You have a lot of factories out there, but it's sort of very volatile on how far in advance you have to be approaching the factory and getting in line to be in their production schedule, and then kind of matching that production schedule once you're in that queue to the actual site-built readiness can be challenging too, whether it's environmental problems that you come up to when you're starting to do foundations or whatever. So I mean, there's a lot of implementation challenges to just aligning all of these schedules. Even though it's happening off-site, you still have a lot of work to do on-site. And then I think that kind of flows to the long-term challenges of just like factories and the production base in America right now is still very volatile, and it's hard to sort of trust that a factory is going to be around for the next 20 years. You've seen a lot of factories like Katera or smaller factories kind of churn and go out of business every couple years, mostly because there's just a really high capital cost to starting a factory and very volatile sales cycle. And then again, like even if they have a 100-unit apartment project in line for production, the site might not be ready to take the units. So you sort of have this big inventory overhang, and it just sort of big cash crunch. And so I think that's where it kind of comes to, looking at housing production, off-site housing production, manufacturing in the country as sort of a federally supported, almost like a federal defense type of thing where we commit a certain amount of funds to off-site production. Right now, I mean, it's sort of, a lot of factories are just kind of fending off on their own, trying to make ends meet. And there's, some interesting initiatives coming out in Canada. CMHC provided a lot of federal funding that's earmarked to, having to use a modular provider for your project. And so I think, earmarking federal funds with like, hey, this is for construction, but you have to use a modular builder, does end up helping and support and ensuring that factories have kind of demand long term. So I think that's one of the challenges, is just like knowing that the factory is going to be still in business, that there's a production base there. You see a lot of factories in China, for example, that are federally supported, federally subsidized, and they are producing units at a very competitive rate, and they have a lot of business in the pipeline, and that ends up being sustainable because you have sort of you're not just depending on the private party to support a factory's investment. All right.
Looks pretty good. It's a source from ModX. Looks like they're bringing together a bunch of different research needs. Very relevant. Ivan's doing a great job.
Yeah, I mean, HUD has been kind of researching, even since the late 60s, early 70s, HUD has been leading this kind of research on off-site construction. So I think this ModX report, I think, was maybe last year, but again, we can dabble around with a couple $100,000 studies from the federal government every once in a while, but it's really, I think the federal government has yet to sort of move into a position of, we're going to stand behind this industry, like the car industry, for example, where, you know, it's even when it gets into a cash crunch or it's threatened by external forces, we're going to stand behind it and bail them out. That's not the case right now. So it's sort of, even though the housing crisis is front and center, we don't really take a position of supporting, you know, scalable building systems that can drive down the cost. So I think it's, unfortunately, still an uphill battle. Is this the last slide?
I think so.
Okay, yeah.
We're doing on time, but looks like we may have a few minutes if there's any Q&A, or we can play a game of run back through the deck and see which slides are Dennis and, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what the percentage breakout is, but I mean, LA and actually 14 different cities across California have pre-approved backyard home plans. And you know, in LA, for example, so again, it's like no one's working together across the state on, you know, housing production or standardized plans. But in LA, so I think there's maybe 38 pre-approved plans, and maybe 12 or 14 of those are modular options. So the city has taken some steps to try to figure out, like, okay, let's get ahead and try to standardize or pre-approve plans. The problem is like every single plan, even if it's pre-approved, the site that it sits on still has to go through review, so you're still sort of starting from scratch. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not sure what like the production numbers are for that, but I would say, you know, it's the 80, I want to say ADUs are a great place for modular to kind of take off, but again, like if someone's spending $100,000 to $300,000 in a backyard home, it's oftentimes that person wants to customize, you know, a window or a door or the layout of the unit, and so it ends up kind of defeating the purpose of like copying and pasting a product sort of over and over again. So that there are challenges. I mean, it's the same kind of challenges with infill multifamily. Is like you think of a prefab, a pre-designed system, and you're like, okay, this is perfect for a 50 by 150 lot that I can kind of do this with, you know, 7-foot side yard setbacks, and it kind of copy and paste it. But then when you find sites in the real world, it's like, oh, there's a tree that I have to like preserve, or there's some setback off of a power line in the back that ends up cutting it by 3 feet, and so you end up losing 2 units, and then you end up wanting to like maximize the site, and so you end up kind of customizing the site again for that system. So it's tough.
Right.
Yeah, and I think
I thought you knew about my project there for a second because the rear setback off the power line. I think the only way to really statistics I don't have because I'm not a researcher, but if we look at production momentum of larger factories, and that occasionally they'll have like a stealth mode, like ADU line that they tell friends and family about, that does show that there's been more momentum. But generally speaking, fabrication relies on volume, and wherever the path of least resistance for volume is where those folks will go to make their margin. So that could be a lot of individual single sites if we're ordering in bulk, like a Hanamobo, and doing a bunch of different scatter sites, or one big developer putting 5 buildings down someone's line. So perhaps understanding those fabricators would probably be able to give us the most detail.
Yeah, and I think we opened this too, talking about the demand for home. Part of the reason we're talking about factory modular, and there's so many different types. You talk about the whole module of a floor at a time that can get delivered, or panelized systems that can get delivered. We hear so much about ADUs as being the solution, but I've searched for data and I can't find it on how many of those ADUs are actually being used as rental units to get attainable housing for people. It's very little. But when you start to look at what, say, is, for example, as the time frame of doing multifamily, when you see panelized construction, the time that they can put those panels delivered, put on site is incredible of how quickly they can get that done. But then you also look at the consistency of constructability. The panels for a unit in this on one side of the building are identical to the other side. So when you talk about structural aspects of that, things like that, there's more consistency in construction versus the traditional site built.
Yeah, I mean, it's so I originally started this pilot project thinking that, like a lot of people, that the high cube shipping container would be the best answer because it's sort of, we're in LA, there's a bunch of these dry goods, high cubes sitting around, but then, you learn that high cubes, they're sort of made on a one-off customized basis already at CIMC, like the Chinese manufacturer that produces 90% of the shipping containers out there. So it's actually not really that sustainable. And then the dimensions of it are very restrictive. So I mean, ideally, if I was building a backyard home, I wouldn't really want to have an 8-foot wide home. So once you start wanting to have maybe 9-foot wide interiors, the amount of cutting open a container and then like redoing it all is just sort of, it's kind of a waste of resources, honestly. Like I wouldn't use a high cube to do a backyard home. I mean, still, I think the steel chassis works, but it's kind of over-engineered for the tiny home. I haven't. I mean, there has been like the tiny movable home ordinance in Los Angeles that does allow you to build one in your backyard. They kind of view tiny homes more as like you have to hide the wheels, and tiny homes, you know, they come with on a trailer with wheels, and so they're still very like people are thinking about like I guess trying to fit homes into a category and then judge it based on that versus trying to figure out like how to create a beautiful home that's affordable for delivery, and like maybe it doesn't have wheels but it still kind of constitutes as a movable home. So but I don't know how other cities are approaching. I know that other cities have kind of started to be open to having these tiny homes and sort of following a design aesthetic that hides the movability of it, like hiding the wheels and various.
Yeah, I know the city of Menifee, they're not using factory modular, but if you go to their website, they have, I believe it's 6 pre-approved sets of plans that if you have a property that, it's pre-approved, so essentially you'd need to create a site plan, and this would align perfectly with modular, that, and the timing of not having to go through the jurisdictional aspect of getting that approved. So I think there's little steps like that that can make a big difference in moving this forward.
So like the small lot ordinance where you're like fee simple subdivision.
One building and stack.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it was going at, where I'm not going to say a campsite, but it's sort of like where you come onto a site and you have each individual building on it with all like the hookups of the infrastructure of the place.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen. That's great. I think that'd be a great innovation. I haven't seen projects in, I guess, LA where they've successfully done like it's sort of like a small lot home mixed with a one-story micro home. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. We'll be respectful of the next session, give them some time to set up. So really appreciate everybody coming, and thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks, bro panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.